Hello everybody, welcome back to Wolfeei, because today we have another video topic on our hands regarding block wars. This time, it is public feedback that I will be giving my take on, because I think it's interesting to talk about, and I already gave my 2 cents on Reddit, but I know not everybody checks Reddit. This is kind of the main hub where everybody comes together to hear my thoughts, so here are my thoughts. On the Reddit, as of yesterday, there was a post made titled, "My Opinions on the Block Wars Multiplier." In the feedback TLDR, they say it's not good. So today we're going to talk about if the block wars multiplier is actually not good, or if it's bad, right? And why. I will look into an analysis of why the changes were made. I'll explain why the changes were made for the multiplier when this happened previously. It's been a few events, but when the multiplier was changed, I'll explain what happened. And then also I will explain what might happen next. So let's first look into the post so you're all the way caught up to speed. They say, the new multiplier is bad. Feedback. I like all the new decision donut changes as of recently, but they all feel basically worthless with how the current multiplier is structured. Sure, it might feel different having Order Up and Tomb being played games 3 and 4 instead of 1 and 2, but that doesn't matter at all or very little when it has the exact same values still. That is true. Totally fair feedback. Totally agree. A gradual multiplier might be slightly less balanced for overall scoring, but it makes the game order for each event feel more impactful and meaningful. Sure. A gradual multiplier will also stop games that almost get played late, like Extraction, from always being a team's final placement decider. Sure, right? Within this feedback, there's nothing wrong. This feedback is valid. This makes sense. I can agree with this. I understand it, and it's fair. I did give my opinion because there is something about how scoring kind of works that doesn't really get looked into very often because it's not really something that you might think about, but I will show an example of the percentage impact that a game has on your team's total score with the multiplier. Regardless of how well you do, the percentage impact on your team's score can be calculated by the multiplier. What you do right here, which we'll get into first, I guess, because it kind of leads into this, is you have the multiplier, you tally up the total of the multiplier, and you divide the game's multiplier by the total, which then results in certain percentages. This is what I tabulated yesterday to kind of look into the multiplier stuff and see where's the feedback coming from, and also what did we actually do? Why did we change it? And here you see why we changed it. Previously, Block Wars Series 2, which is the OG multiplier, the way that the multiplier and scoring was structured, you'd have a multiplier of 1 for game 1 and 2, then a 1.5 for 3 and 4, 2 for 5 and 6, 7 has a 2.5, and 3 has, or game 8 has a 3x multiplier, which is definitely interesting. It's it was at least the second most significant game multiplier order in all events, the most significant being MCCs, but we'll get into that in a little bit. The main problem with the way that this multiplier was structured, in my opinion, and also one of the main reasons why we looked into it, is that a lot of times teams get screwed over by the multipliers in an event. This kind of goes across all events, etc. And I kind of wanted to just experiment and try to make things a little bit different. So, for example, you could have a team in first place in Game 7 and then have like a mediocre performance in Game 8, but because of how big of a multiplier there is, that could have an impact. Obviously, with the way the multipliers change, that doesn't really matter. It's the exact wrong example to use, but what could happen is a team could be in first confidently by like Game 5, and then get screwed over by the multipliers after, because some of the earlier games are pretty much just voided with how some multipliers are structured. For example, if we look at Block Wars Series 2 initially, which is the most extreme multiplier there was an impact of about 7% of Game 1 and Game 2, which is not a lot. That means that essentially for the first half hour plus of the event that you're playing, you're not really doing much. The impact of those games isn't really that significant. And then further along it's structured, obviously the multiplier increases, and you start to get to like game 3 and 4, like 10%, then 14% for game 5 and 6, and then 17, and then like 21%, right? Also, over here, is the most important stat for this, which is why it was looked into. Block Wars' multiplier previously in Series 2 had 65.5% of the total points a team earns, right? Regardless of how well you do, the percentage impact on your score, 65.5% of that was just the second half of the event, which means the first half of the event counts for a third of your score, roughly, which I think is too much. That was too extreme. That is not fair for people who do well in the first half to have only a third of that, or only have that performance at most, depending on how well you did in the first 4 games, have at most a third impact on your score. That's unfair. I do not think that is fair. However, then we change it, in which the idea was, maybe if we also another, we'll get to this a little bit, but the idea was maybe if we make the multiplier, kind of remove the multiplier for the most part and kind of only apply it at the end, you still have a comeback feeling, but you allow for more fair scoring across the board. And one main reason behind this was competitiveness. One of the main problems with the multipliers is that competitiveness is very high in, decision donuts, etc., or decision domes in MCC, etc., where you have to actively, competitively pick your order to make sure that you can win. And that's not really what we wanted all the time for Block Wars, because Block Wars, obviously, as you know, is trying to be a bit lower comp on average and be a bit more friendly to any type of player, etc., in which we thought maybe, scaling down that multiplier would help. Which, the first time we did it was definitely very extreme. You go from, a gradual multiplier to just straight up one multiplier for games 1 through 6, and only at the end you get a slight increase, in which the games at the end still have a good amount of impact. But you can clearly tell the gap goes from 65.5% to 58%. That is a difference of 7.5%-ish, roughly, right? Which is a lot. 7.5%, if you do the math, is a number. I'm trying to think in my head real quick what percentage of this, or what percentage different this is, but whatever, right? How big of an impact that actually is. But still, here in the old scoring, the first half is only a third of your score, and in the second version of the scoring, your first half is not half of your points, but almost half. Which I thought was interesting, right? It's an interesting approach to scoring. It's different. And we wanted to try something different and see how it could work, how it would impact the event overall. Then we had some feedback after Block Wars 12 where people said, hey, maybe there should be slightly more of a comeback potential at the end, just to make it a bit more comeback-esque rather than just have whatever, really, right? In which we added the 1.25x for Game 6. So, and that resulted in a 1% increase of the second half mattering or counting towards your points. So, that is the current multiplier. This is why it's green. Block Wars 13 was when this change was made, and as of Block Wars 14, obviously it seems like it was the event after, but it's been about 3 months since Block Wars 13, or if not longer. That scoring still stands. And until now, we didn't really have too much negative feedback towards that specific thing. It wasn't necessarily people being like, oh my god, this is so much better. It was more like, yeah, I guess this is a change, right? This is fine. However, now there's the feedback here, and that's where I wanted to give my input here on Reddit, and also just wanted to talk about it just in general. Where I said, I'll look into it, but ultimately the new multiplier only really affects the first few games, and games 6 through 7, the rest of the points gained from games is almost identical to what it was before. Look at that. First few games, significantly different, goes from 7% to 10%, that's a major increase. Game 3 and 4 doesn't really matter that much. Game 5 and 6, or Game 5 does make a difference, Game 6 not really, and then the last 2 games are a little different, did I say that right? No, so Game 6 and 7, not Game 8. Game 8's almost the same, Game 7 is slightly different, Game 6 is now different, but it previously was one of the more drastically different ones. Realistically speaking, this should have said Game 5 and 6, or 7, but I didn't have these calculations when I said this, I just know that we looked at it previously. So this should have said, first 2 games, Game 5 and 7, are the only ones that really are impacted, and then the rest of the points gained are just almost the same, right? Which is true, that is true from this. Almost the identical same points gained in the old multiplier for some of these games as it is in the new one, which you could say, why did you change it? That's because of what I explained previously. Some teams get screwed over early on, and also because of the percentage of the impact in the second half of the event, because you don't want that to be too impactful, because it just essentially makes the beginning of the event pointless. Then I continue to say, I think one of the main reasons why people may view the current multiplier as less impactful is just because of situational pop-offs during the event. With order-ups, less balanced scoring previously, you'd have some teams, for example, Feinberg's teams, secure an early lead and keep it for a while due to the large point gap. When the new multiplier was implemented, I even calculated the results using the old multiplier, and it made no difference. This is true in Blockwars 12, when the feedback was given about, oh, early points matter too much, you need more of a later comeback swap. I'm complaining because previously I would have been able to win, or previously a team could have had a difference. I calculated it, did not make a difference. The problem wasn't the multiplier, the problem was the scoring itself. So, continuing forward, most recently you had Yellow in battle that made a significant jump and held on to their lead throughout the other games. They never actually did bad in any games, so regardless of the multiplier, they would have held on. My team, Aqua, actually made a bit of a comeback later on, but again, regardless of the multiplier, this would have happened. That is true. That is true. I have not calculated this, but that is true. Because if my team at the end made a comeback in this multiplier, looking at this multiplier, my team would have only made more of a comeback later on. So again, that is true. My team made enough of a comeback at the end where we barely came back from our... Well, we didn't do bad in the first half, right? But we did okay. So we went from mid in the first half to actually getting first at the end. Because again, like mentioned, Game 8 is just as much of a comeback potential as it was previously, pretty much. Essentially what I'm trying to say is that the problem more lies in balancing the multiplier. A lot of these results are very situational because I can't predict whether someone will have a good event day or not, which is true. In the last event, there were multiple cases of people that didn't perform as expected, whether it was way better or way worse, and that's out of my control. I cannot control whether a team is going to have a pop-off or not. That is not something I can determine in the balancing, and sometimes people blame me for a team being too strong when I cannot control players improving during the process of the teams being made and the event actually happening. And then also, it's possible the multiplier is going to have an impact on the results. We'll look into it, but so far the feedback and complaints are aimed at the wrong thing, which I do still think is true. The way that most of the feedback about this type of stuff is structured is incorrect, or more so incorrectly guided. People complain about the multiplier because they think it has more impact, or think it has such significantly different impact than it usually does, more so talking about the late comeback. People usually don't talk about early games being worth less, but more so talk about, like, it used to always be more at the end, which for some part is true, obviously, like the percentage here says, but for some part it's not, because usually people look at only the Game 8 and stuff like that. Also, another thing to mention that is very important, which is one of the main reasons why this change initially was made from Blockwars Series 2 to Blockwars 11 more so, right? This is just something I just remembered. The combination of Game 1, 2, and 3 is barely more impact than just Game 8. That's ridiculous. I don't think that should ever be a thing. I think that is absolute lunacy. I don't think that is fair at all for Game 8 alone to be almost as valuable. It's not the same. Okay, I understand. I can do math. I know this adds up to like 24-ish, right? Roughly 24. And this is 20, like almost 1, but still almost the same. Game 1, 2, and 3 together is almost the same as just Game 3. I think is a little bit ridiculous. That's one of the main reasons why this was changed. However, I will admit, because one of the things that I didn't factor in terms of this change initially being made is the perspective of the players. How do players perceive this? Do the players actually realize that this change, or how this change works? Do they actually realize what the impact of a multiplier is? And the answer is probably no, because who in the right mind is going to sit and calculate this all out? Although it is simple if you look at the formulas. It's easy, but so still, nobody in their right mind who's just casually playing an event is going to really look into this. So they're going to have the perception of, oh, early games are, or it doesn't really matter what we do, or we don't have a chance to come back, blah, 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 whatever, because the early games matter too much, and if we do bad in the beginning, we can't come back, which isn't true, but still. I will admit that this mentality does exist, and the multiplier, unfortunately, cannot really stay in this exact structure because people perceive it as not being able to be to make a comeback in, because that's just how people perceive the event. This is something I partially learned, not in this specific context, but when I was in university, there was a class which was, I think, microeconomics, where you kind of get taught about regardless of actual value, a person might individually perceive a value differently. Thus, you have to sometimes adjust your approach based off of your what you expect them to want. In this case, I expect players to want a gradual multiplier because they think it has a specific type of impact and they feel more comfortable in that type of environment, which may be true. That is totally fair. That's totally valid. And that's why I said we're going to look into it. I can't guarantee that the multiplier will be changed, but we'll look into it. I get told here that sometimes I'm missing the point. Trust me, I did not miss the point. I understand that that is a factor. I understood that from this feedback, and I've seen it in the past as well, that some people have said that. I just didn't really think that it was going to be as important as people have made it to be. So, also if you look at some of the other events, because I put this as a comparison to kind of look at how do these multipliers actually work in other events, and is it better or worse elsewhere. You kind of notice that the MCC and PB multiplier are like similar, but not the same. They just they ramp up in impact differently. If you look at MCC, if I'm being completely honest, I think the way the MCC multiplier goes is not the best, but not bad. I think it's fine. Mostly because I think game 1 only maturing for 6% is ridiculous. I think that's not that great, but I do think it's better to have game 8 only matter for like 19% rather than 21. Not that that's that big of a difference, but it's slightly more, I can't remember the word, more forgiving, right? It's a bit more forgiving to the players to have the last game not actually matter that much. Although it does matter 3 times as much as game 1, literally exactly 3 times as much, obviously. It feels a little wrong that game 1 is only worth like that little. Same as what happened with blockwars initially. I think that's not enough. I think 6.9% is not that great. And then when you look at PB, I honestly think PB's multiplier is one of the best. I think this is one of the better ones, and maybe even the best out of all the events right now, in terms of how fairly it applies percentage points to teams. I will say that the 64% impact at the end is maybe a little much. I wish there was a way to tone that down, but unfortunately, without making weird decimal multipliers at the bottom, you're not going to really accomplish that. But I do think it's nice that, 7.5%, like the thing does scale up pretty nicely. I do think what they could maybe do is maybe make game 2 slightly more valuable, but I don't think it's that big of a deal. I don't think it's that important for them to change it. However, I forgot to do this, but I'm going to do this right now. Let me actually draft what that would look like so you understand my feedback. 1 second. Okay, I'm back. You won't notice any difference, but I'm back for me. This took like 5 minutes. I made 2 drafts. One of using PBs and only adjusting it slightly, and then one for what I think would be the actual perfect multiplier, which I will test. I'll get it tested. So, let's get into it. PB fixed. I said PB was the one I liked the most. The only thing that I didn't love the most was that the later half had that much impact on the score. Obviously, a few percent difference is not that big of a deal, but just having the feeling that almost a third of the points only is in the first half, it kind of sucks. So what I drafted, or more so what I changed, is I said that you start the 0.25 multiplier in game 2, and then move the 0.5 multiplier up here as well. And that feels nicer. I mean, you could make this a 1.25 as well. It doesn't really make a huge difference. It's just 1% difference in the percent of points gained in the second half. If you make it a 1.25, it's 63% different or impact from the second half. And if you make it a 1.5, it's 62% impact. So 1% difference. Kind of, pick your poison at that point, what you think is the best. Now, finally, we have this one. The one that's labeled blockwars 15, because this is what I had in my blockwars sheet to look at in terms of what I think might actually be the best multiplier to use. And the one that I will probably ask to get tested during the event, or more so during testing for the next event. This multiplier, as you can see, coincidentally has a perfect round percent for every single impact on games as well, which is very nice. Also, it is a gradually increasing one, which is what people want. Also, the first game doesn't just completely lose its value. 8% of score is less than, what you would have previously, but you can still vote games early to kind of make them worth a bit less, and you still get games that are worth, significant amount of points, but not like a super crazy amount of points. Also, the second half still has an impact of 62%, which I think is fine. I don't think that's a crazy, number. That kind of makes sense. It means you get a proper late event comeback, but you don't just completely make it too much or too little, because I do think 59% might be too little for some people. So 62 is a nice middle ground in between the old one and the new one, or the old one and the most recent one, and then maybe the new one is kind of literally almost perfectly in between. So there you go. And also, in Game 8, 20% seems fine. 20% of the points, a fifth of the entire event is in Game 8. That's like not perfect, but it's fine. I think that's okay. I mean, that 2.5x won't feel like it's that much more than, a 1x, when a 3x feels like much more than a 1x. But when you look at the actual impact, this 2.5x is going to be worth more. So I think this is pretty much, in my opinion, the perfect multiplier. I think this is what we're going to test. And if it succeeds, you'll see it in blockwars, or maybe you'll see it adjusted. Who knows? So let me know your thoughts. Do you agree with this feedback and this approach? Or do you think it's bad? Or do you think it's the best thing? Or whatever feedback you have, let me know. And also let me know which multiplier is your favorite and why. Because I know there's a lot of people in the audience that are more competitively oriented in terms of viewing, and probably will say that their favorite is going to be the Blockwars Series 2 one, because, oh my god, the late games have the most impact. But some people might be like, you know what, I like it being more spread out. Or maybe some people would be like, you know what, actually, I like this one, or this one, or this one the most, right? There's going to be some people who have different opinions. So let me know, and I'll see you later. Goodbye.